sentence of 15 years behind bars, more than what the defense had asked for, which is 10 years, but substantially less than what Brad Smith, the DA, and his team had asked for, which was 80 years behind bars. We're going to bring in right now a legal expert, Darryl Cohen. He spent time as a prosecutor. He has spent a lot of time as a defense attorney. Darryl, we always appreciate your insight, and we should disclose right off the top, you are not affiliated with this case at all, so you are a true unvarnished perspective on all of this.
Well, I don't know if I'm unvarnished, but I'm clearly not involved.
We'll take what we can get here. Darryl, let's get into it here. You saw the sentence, 15 years. What's your initial reaction when you hear that number for a case like this?
Well, quite frankly, I was very disappointed. I had anticipated and hoped for a much heavier sentence. It may not matter because Colin Gray is 55 years of age. He may or may not ever get out of prison, and he's not going to jail. He's going to prison. There's a heck of a difference. I was very disappointed because he encouraged, he ignored, he provided, he did all the things that a good father should not do.
Let me reference a little bit from what Judge Prim said from the stand, and it took him about 10, 12 minutes of effectively preamble to then get to the actual sentence he was imposing here, which was, we should point out, a substantially longer period of remarks than Judge Prim took before sentencing Colt Gray earlier this week. Judge Prim from the bench was clearly wrestling with the notion of holding Colin Gray, the father, criminally responsible for acts he did not carry out. And said in so many words, Colin Gray didn't pull the trigger. Colin Gray didn't premeditate this attack. He didn't know and plan that this was going to happen. And he was wrestling from the bench a little bit with that before arriving at his ultimately imposed sentence of 15 years. Why would a judge wrestle with that? This is a case, as he pointed out, first of its kind here in Georgia.
Well, you start with, this is not a mathematical formula where X happens and therefore Y follows. This is an emotional situation where the entire community, and actually, in fact, the entire United States and perhaps the world, has a view of this and is involved in this emotionally. So Judge Prim had a real problem because it wasn't ABC equals DEF. It was, what do I do? What is the appropriate punishment? Why did this happen? Could Colin Gray have prevented it? Absolutely.
And the judge said as much from the bench, saying, you failed as a parent. Parent, is clear that you failed as a parent. The judge saying at parts that Colin Gray didn't monitor what was going on with his son on the computer. He didn't have him in school during the entirety of Colt Gray's 8th grade year when he was in the custody of Colin Gray, his father. Colt didn't go to school at all. Those factors and others Judge Prim laid out in a long list is evidence of sentencing to prison time at all, because as the judge pointed out, for all the counts against him, more than 25 of them, I believe 27 in total, none of them carried a mandatory term of imprisonment. Was there ever any chance that Colin Gray could be sentenced to no prison time at all here, realistically?
Mathematically, yes. Realistically, not on this earth. He was going to be incarcerated. It was a question of how much or how little time he was going to be sentenced to.
What kind of precedent does this set for future cases? And I want to be really clear here, and I think everybody in this room, everybody watching will agree, we hope and we pray we never have to talk about another case like this here in Georgia. That said, this is now legal precedent. It's first of its kind. A parent being held criminally responsible for the violent acts of their child. How will this inform future cases like this if they do come up?
The world is watching, and the world has watched. This happened in Michigan. A parent was sentenced to incarceration time. I think that this is hopefully the type of wake-up call that every parent needs to listen to, needs to hear, and more precisely, needs to pay attention to, because he or she needs to be able and must take care of their child or children and guide them appropriately, not ignore.
Let me ask you a question, put on my law school hat a little bit here, and ask you a question I could recall a professor of mine likely asking, which is, this was obviously an extreme case. The laundry list of acts of what the judge and ultimately the jury found were acts of negligence on behalf of Colin Gray was a long one. But in convicting and then sentencing a parent for the criminal, violent acts of their child, in this case, does it also open the door up to closer call cases and prosecuting and potentially convicting a parent? Do you think of a circumstance perhaps where a parent leaves their keys out in a place that's available to their child? The child doesn't have a license, but they take the keys anyway. They go, they drive, they cause an accident. Does this case begin a path down a road that could lead to the parent in that hypothetical also facing criminal responsibility?
I think every case depends on the specific facts of the case. Possibly, possibly not. I think all of this has to depend on what the particular circumstances of that case are. And it very well might, but it also may not. Had Colin Gray not had custody of his son, had he just been visiting his son, had his son just been visiting him for the weekend, entirely different set of circumstances. So we always in the law like to say, look at each and every case individually, not collectively.
Let's talk policy matters more broadly now. We have been, of course, talking about back to school. We're in a phase where student bodies all across the state are getting ready to go back. Barrow County goes back tomorrow. We've seen some developments at the state capitol as well, talking about how to keep kids safe, how to keep schools safe. From a legal policy perspective, is there anything Georgia can be doing better, the judicial system can be doing better to, and you saw DA Brad Smith talk about this, deter these kinds of acts and to incentivize parents to be engaged and on top of this stuff before it gets to this kind of level?
Not a word I like to use in the criminal system, but marketing. Marketing, advertising, social media. Let each and every parent know collectively he or she must look at his or her child or children and must guide them. And if that child or children is having a problem, get him or her or them to the proper professional. Yes, that's what we're saying, because how safe can we make it? Not safe enough. But can we prevent this sort of thing from ever happening again? Probably not. Can we lessen the likelihood? Probably so.
I want to ask you about the perspective of some of the families of the victims of this attack. A lot of those families, a lot of the loved ones, they were in the courtroom today when the sentence was handed down. Our Grace King was in the courtroom as well, and as she reported, a lot of those families were displeased with this sentence. Does the law give those families any vehicle to, A, try to get the sentence changed, or B, try to get some semblance of justice through the civil system?
Well, through the civil system, obviously they can file lawsuits. And what do you win in the civil system? If you win a verdict. Will you collect the money in that verdict? Very unlikely. But here, the families are justifiably upset. No matter what Judge Prim did, they would have been upset, and they deserve to be upset, because there is something called justice. But justice is sometimes retribution, but they will never get their loved ones back. So whatever happened, however the court gave a verdict, the sentence, they would not have been happy, and they shouldn't have been happy.
This was also a terrible tragedy that took place in a small corner of our judicial system. This is in Barrow County. The Piedmont Judicial Circuit, it's such a small area that one county isn't enough for a DA. They have two. It's Barrow and I believe it's Jasper. Brad Smith, his team, suddenly has to take on a case of unimaginable tragedy in the spotlight, not just of the state, but of the country and of the world. When you look at how they handled, his team handled both the Colin Gray and the Colt Gray case, how do you view the way they handled it?
I think they did an incredibly good job. Here is something that they never anticipated would happen. It fell on their lap. It was heinous. It was horrible. It was horrendous. And never once did they fumble. Never once did they stop moving forward. They did what they had to do.
How difficult is that as a prosecutor to just go through the blocking and tackling of making sure that all your I's are dotted, all your T's are crossed? You do that in any case, surely, but especially in one like this where God knows you want to do it right.
you make sure that every assistant DA that you have, male or female, young or old, with heavy experience, light experience, no experience, goes through this together so that if there's something that's perhaps missed, someone or someones will point it out.
All right, Darryl. We're short on time here. Very grateful for your perspective throughout this saga and your insight. You've helped us better understand all of it. I want to give the last word to you. It's been almost 2 years since this horrible attack took place. A long time span. And then in a very compressed time span of a week, really 48 hours, we saw both the son, the shooter, and the father, Colt Gray and Colin Gray, sentenced to prison. When you look back on how this almost 2-year legal proceeding played out, what stands out to you? What are you going to remember? What do you hope people who watched and the state as a whole takes away from it?
What I will remember, even though it seems like it took a long time, 2 years is very little time in the legal system. Two, the fact that both defendants were sentenced in the same week makes it extremely important because it has impact. And the impact needs to be on the entire country, on the entire world, on every parent, whoever he or she or they may be. Take care, pay attention to, love your kids, but guide them.
All right, Darryl Cohen, thank you for your insight, your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thanks.